Hello everybody. Today I'm going to take you through the process of moving from the design proposal that you've created following your development work and moving that on to produce a working drawing and cutting list so you can manufacture the product in a workshop. Before we get started, the design proposal followed on from the development work we were doing when we were looking at all of the design factors, making sure that we had made choices step by step along a journey towards the final design, which we call the design proposal. The design proposal can be simply presented as a sketch which is rendered to make it look like it is made from different materials, and then we also annotate to show how we've used the different design factors with the final design. The challenge now is to create a working drawing which is based upon the design proposal that you've produced. So the learning intention is that you're learning how to produce a working drawing and you're learning how to produce a cutting list. Success criteria for producing the working drawing are to produce a 2D orthographic sketch of your design proposal, to include dimensions on your sketch, and to use those dimensions to create a cutting list. Okay, so getting started, we need to keep our design proposal handy because we're going to reference it when we're making the working drawing. So I'm just going to put that to the side and then reveal this blank page here. On this page, you've got a lot of room. So what I'd like you to do is to identify an area where the working drawing will go, and then identify an area where the cutting list will go. First of all, we're going to start with a working drawing. I'm going to just sketch a square on my page so I know that that is where my working drawing has to be. By dividing the page up like this, it keeps your work neat and tidy, and it means it's easier for the reader to understand, but also easier for you to understand what you're doing, especially when you look back at your work when you go to the workshop to manufacture. So on here you can see I've got a very light square on my page. Now onto the left hand side of my page, down the bottom, this is where I'm going to create a space that my cutting list is going to go into. And it's always worthwhile making titles on these so you know what you're doing. So here is my working drawing. And here is my cutting list. The next thing I have to do is I'm going to break this square up into other sections to explain how I'm going to use two-dimensional drawings to communicate an actual product. Down the bottom left of my square, I'm going to give myself an area where that is going to be what we call the elevation. So I'm just dividing this space up. I'm using really light lines because I don't want them to be that visible when I'm finished. So here I've got a rectangle which will be called the elevation. The elevation is the front view. Above that, I'm going to take other lines up the way, and this is where my top view is going to be. Now I know that the top view of my model is going to be relatively narrow compared to the elevation. This top view, or looking straight down on top of the product, is called the plan. So I'm going to put a wee title there. And then over to the right hand side of where I did my elevation, I need another view which is going to be in this space over here, and I need to divide that up. Now when you're doing this, you're going to use your design proposal to help you with proportion. You'll notice that the thickness or the width of this rectangle here roughly matches that there on the plan. Ideally they should be identical. Looking at my design proposal, the elevation or the front view will be looking straight towards the view where you would see the postcards facing you. So imagine this on a wall. The elevation is looking at it as it's hanging on the wall. The plan view is looking down from the top. as if you're maybe an ant walking across the wall and looking down the way. You can see the top of the pieces of wood, and you can see the edge of this acrylic here, and you can see these screw holes very well because you're looking down the way. And then the right hand end elevation, which was the third view I've put on my working drawing, would be the view looking from the right hand side. So you'd see this end face here, you would see this edge of the acrylic, you see these little edges. We'll get into that later on. Now remember, I put my right hand view here, I forgot to title that, so I'm going to put right hand end elevation. Elevation just means something that is in front of you as you look at it, but in this case I'm round the right hand side of my model. So now we're going to start sketching our elevation in place. We start with the elevation because it is the most obvious one to use because it's the front view. So I've got this space to work with. I've made this in the proportion of the product itself. So now what I need to do is I need to divide this up to look like the product I've designed. I'm going to start with the easiest part, or the main part, and for me that's the pieces of wood that make up this bit at the top of the design proposal, here and here. So you can now see I've put in the two pieces of wood, the one on the left and the one on the right. I've also put the screw holes in to show how it's going to be hung on the wall. These are in proportion with each other and they resemble the product I've designed. Now I've not quite firmed them in yet, they're not very dark lines, they're a little bit darker, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the acrylic plastic on that looks like the waterfall. So I've now drawn in the pieces of acrylic. I've left the bottom free because that's where the kind of cloud-shaped water is going to be at the bottom. You'll see here, if you look closely, that I've shown where the screw holes would go through that hold the pieces of bent acrylic onto the piece of wood. When we look from here on the elevation, we can't see the holes. However, we know they're there. Therefore, I've used a dashed line to show that that's what we call hidden detail. So a hidden detail line looks like this. So hidden detail is dash, 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 instead of a solid outline, which would just show the edge of a part. You can see I've now added the frothy water at the bottom of where the waterfall hits the water below. I've got my acrylic and I've got my wood. Now I didn't firm my wood in before, so I can go back and do that now because I'm finished putting the other bits and pieces in. You can see I've now finished sketching in my elevation. I've not added any dimensions yet, we'll do that at the end. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on the plan view. So remember, the plan view is looking straight down the way from the top. You can see that this piece of wood is thinner than this piece of wood, which is thicker. You can also see that I'll be looking at the holes on the top here, and I'll see just little skinny pieces or thin pieces of acrylic as I look from the top. That's going to be the trickiest part to do. You can see there that all I did was move from the left hand side to the right hand side of my elevation, and as I was doing that, when I came to any feature or any main feature, I have drawn a line up through my plan where I want to put my plan, because I'm going to use these lines to help me arrange my plan to match up with the elevation below it. The length of the plan should be exactly the same length as the elevation, and the width of each part on the elevation should be matched with the width on the plan. What I've done here is, using the width of my elevation, as I said before, is I've now decided the proportion of how thick this piece of wood is compared to this one, and I have put that onto the plan view. I've also left a skinny or a thin area here where the acrylic would fold over the front, and I need to divide that up now. These lines I'm doing at the moment, these are construction lines. They should really be a little bit lighter, but I want you to be able to see them. So I know that if I'm looking down from the top, these pieces of acrylic are the first thing I would get to compared to the wood. So what I do is I firm these in first. There's the first piece of acrylic, and that stops when it gets to the back of the wood. Here's this piece here now, and this piece. The wood can now be firmed in. Now, because I'm using pen here, this line here shouldn't actually be as dark as that. So that shouldn't be there. This is my outline here for my piece of wood. This is my outline here for the acrylic. This one's much better. Now I'm going to put the holes in place that would hold the acrylic on, or where the screws would go through to hold the acrylic on. I want this to line up with the one over from it. Okay, so that's where the holes hold this piece of acrylic onto the piece of wood behind it. Next, I'm going to do the clouds of water at the bottom of the waterfall, and also the trees at the top that grow around the waterfall tops. That should really be green, shouldn't it? I'll go back and do that later. So to help you understand, you can see that I've added some colour, just like the colours used in my design proposal. Looking down on top, I've got my plan view. I can see the holes where the screws would go through. I've got the top view of my wooden pieces. I've got the top view of the bushes or the trees at the top of the waterfall. I've also got the top view of the thin piece of acrylic that would make up the foam at the bottom of the waterfall. And you can see here, I've got the area across the top of the water, and this is where it would fold over. So here, because I've got a line that passes underneath the acrylic, that has to be dashed because it's hidden detail. So that's important that we show that hidden detail so people understand that that's a solid piece of wood that continues all the way through, and then this piece of wood continues all the way through these two pieces of acrylic. If we don't show the hidden detail, it would mean to the reader of the drawing that this is one piece of wood, two pieces of wood, three pieces of wood, but actually it's just one piece of wood all the way across. I will now move over to the right hand side to do the end elevation.